Welcome to Whispers of Asia, a place where silence tells stories and forgotten rituals echo through time. Here, legends are not fiction, they are warnings. Every whisper you hear has a shadow behind it. Every tale was once a truth. Today we take you to a lakeside village in southern China, a place not marked on any map, a place where the fog never lifts. Once a year, after the Hungry Ghost Festival, the villagers wake before dawn on the third day, dressed in white, holding bowls wrapped in cloth. No one speaks, no one watches, and no one explains why. But local legend says, long ago, in a famine so cruel it stripped the soul from man, 3 lives were offered, not out of malice, but out of ritual. Those who were sacrificed never left. They return every year, not for food, but to be fed something far more human: memory. And those who watch the procession lose theirs. First, a name, then a face, then entire years, until they too walk in silence, bowl in hand, white robes brushing the earth, remembering nothing except that they must walk. This is the festival of the third day, the day when the dead do not haunt the living, they feed on them. The road ended before the map did. Li Wei stepped off the bus onto a patch of gravel so thin it crunched like bones underfoot. The air was heavy with moisture, the kind that clung to your skin and whispered through your clothes. Fog curled around his ankles like stray cats, curious and quiet. There was no sign, no welcome, just a dirt path disappearing into the trees, and a silence too deliberate to be natural. Jing Tan, he whispered to himself, pulling the name from memory like a fragile thread. The village wasn't marked on modern maps. It had taken months of reading, whispers in university halls, and a half-dozen dead ends before the name emerged in an obscure footnote about post-Vulan rituals in southern China. A village that observed something on the third day, but no documentation ever explained what. Just a warning: do not attend, do not observe, do not record. Which, of course, made Li Wei's curiosity unbearable. He was 28, a PhD candidate in cultural anthropology, and chasing ghost traditions that even ghosts had given up retelling. This village was the last piece in his thesis, the missing puzzle in his theory on communal guilt rituals in post-famine societies. If the legends were true, something had happened here long ago, something people tried to forget and yet still remembered in silence. He hiked for nearly 40 minutes. The path narrowed, trees thickened, and the fog deepened until the world became a watercolor wash of gray and green. Birds did not sing here. Leaves didn't rustle. Even his footsteps felt muffled, as if the air itself had ears and disapproved of noise. Then, without warning, the trees parted. A village appeared, as if summoned. Dozens of homes, old wooden structures with curling roofs and paper-covered windows, stood quietly in clusters around the edge of a lake, so still it reflected nothing. The water was black, not from pollution, but from depth. It seemed to pull the sky downward, swallowing light and thought alike. A woman carrying a basket of firewood glanced up and froze. A child playing with a red string stopped mid-motion. A man hammering roof tiles dropped his hammer. It clattered once, loud as a scream in the quiet, and rolled away into shadow. Li Wei smiled politely and offered a small wave. "Hello, I'm here to—" No one replied, not even a nod. The villagers turned, one by one, and disappeared into their homes. Doors shut, windows slid closed, curtains fell like guillotines, and the silence returned. It wasn't rejection, it was fear. He stood alone at the edge of the village with nothing but his backpack, a notebook, and a growing awareness that whatever lived here, whatever breathed behind the walls and blinked beneath the lake, did not welcome visitors. But he had come too far to turn back. And besides, he thought, people always fear what they can't explain. He would explain it. That was his job. He checked into the only available guest house, a crooked wooden building with a single flickering lantern above the door. The innkeeper didn't ask for his name, didn't ask why he was here. She handed him a rusted key, pointed to the second floor, and spoke only 3 words: "Leave before 3rd." He blinked. 3rd what? The woman turned away. He climbed the stairs with a strange chill clinging to his back, the kind you can't shake off with logic or warmth. It wasn't cold, but something behind him felt watching. He set down his bag, opened his notebook, and wrote the date: August 27th, day 0, 3 days after the Hungry Ghost Festival. His pen hovered for a moment. Then he wrote, "They know I've come, but they're not trying to stop me. They're trying to outlast me." And outside, across the lake, the mist swirled like breath from a sleeping mouth, waiting to awaken. The next morning, the fog was thicker. It crept through the wooden cracks of the guest house, clung to the windows, and wrapped the village in a quiet too complete to be natural. Li Wei stepped out with a journal in his pocket and a recorder hidden inside his coat. Not that there was anything to record. The village offered no sound. No dogs barking, no roosters crowing. Only the faint rhythm of feet moving behind doors. His plan was simple. Observe, speak to someone, anyone, and find the origin of this so-called 3rd day. He walked past closed doors and shuttered stalls until he turned a corner and saw it. A small shop tucked between 2 houses, its wooden sign swaying ever so slightly. There were no words carved on it, only a faded red symbol, a stylized bowl with 3 curved lines inside. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, shelves lined the walls, stacked with porcelain bowls. Some were dusty, others wrapped in rice paper. Most were completely white, bone white, without pattern or color, unnervingly pristine. At the center of the shop stood an elderly man in gray robes, eyes clouded by cataracts, yet somehow sharp. He was gently polishing a bowl, whispering something to it under his breath. Li Wei cleared his throat. "Good morning." The old man didn't look up. "I'm a researcher," he continued, stepping forward slowly. "I'm studying ritual objects used in traditional festivals. May I ask—" The man finally raised his head. His voice was dry as dust. "You should not be here." "I understand your concern, but I mean no harm. I simply want to learn." The man stared at him for a long time, then nodded slowly toward a shelf on the far wall. Li Wei stepped closer. The bowls were nearly identical, white porcelain, covered with thin pieces of faded silk or cotton cloth, but they weren't for sale. Each had a small wooden tag tied to it with red thread. Names. Some were so faded they were barely visible. Others looked freshly carved. "What are these?" he asked. "Offerings, carried by those who remember." "Remember what?" The old man didn't answer. Li Wei scanned the names. A few were in traditional script, others used simplified characters. One had English letters, etched clumsily. Amy Liang. Outsiders too? He asked, eyebrows raised. They come, they watch, then they forget. Forget what? Themselves. A chill ran down Li Wei's spine. These bowls, are they part of the ceremony? The old man began wrapping the bowl he'd polished in a white cloth. With slow, practiced movements, he tied it shut, then placed it in a wooden crate beside 3 others, all identical. It is not a ceremony. It is repayment. For what? He turned back, and for the first time, there was fire behind the milky gaze. For what was eaten. The silence after that sentence was suffocating. Li Wei opened his notebook and scribbled down the quote. When he looked up again, the old man was holding something out. A bowl, wrapped. What's this? It was yours before you forgot. I haven't forgotten anything, he replied. The man gave no answer. Li took the bowl, half out of politeness, half out of unease. It was lighter than expected, but the cloth felt damp. He left the shop with the bowl under one arm. Outside, a little girl stood on the opposite side of the street, watching him. Her eyes were too wide, too knowing. She pointed to the bowl and pressed a finger to her lips. Shh. Then she turned and vanished into the fog. The village had returned to stillness. In his notebook, Li Wei wrote, "The bowls are not vessels. They are graves. I have a bowl now. I don't remember why."
The next day, the fog was worse. It slid across the ground like breath, clung to windows like fingers, and blurred the boundary between land and lake until everything looked like it was floating. Li Wei wandered with the bowl, still wrapped in cloth. He hadn't dared open it. It now sat beside his bed, untouched, but never unnoticed. Something about it hummed. Not a sound exactly, more like a pressure in the back of his thoughts, like a word half remembered but never spoken aloud. He needed distraction. He needed answers. So he walked. The village was marginally more alive this morning. 2 men were repairing a fishing net near the lakeside, their heads bent low. A woman scrubbed laundry at a stone basin, humming a melody with no tune. But no one met his eyes. No one greeted him. Until he turned a corner and found the little girl again. She was sitting on the low stone step of a house with no door, tying red string into loops. Her dress was faded yellow, her hair in 2 braids, and when she looked up at him, she smiled, too wide, too still. "Hi," Li Wei said, gently. She didn't respond. He crouched. "What are you making?" She lifted the string. It wasn't a shape, not a flower, not a pattern, just an endless loop. "Do you live here?" She pointed at the sky. "No one lives here." "What do you mean?" She didn't answer, just looked down at her hands again. Then, barely a whisper, barely a breath, she said, "Don't look." His heart tapped twice too hard in his chest. "Why?" he asked. "Because they look back." The words felt too heavy for such a small voice. He opened his mouth to ask more, but a shadow moved behind him. The girl's mother, thin, pale, eyes rimmed with sleeplessness, had stepped out of nowhere. She snatched the girl by the arm and pulled her up sharply. "Apologies," the woman said quickly, not looking him in the eye. "She doesn't speak well." "She seemed quite clear to me." The woman's eyes flicked to the wrapped bowl in his hand, then to his face. "You should leave
before it remembers you. Before what remembers me? But she was already pulling the girl away, murmuring words too soft to catch. The girl looked back once, strings still dangling from her fingers. And then they were gone. The street fell silent. Li Wei stood alone, bowl in hand, and realized something strange. He couldn't remember what the girl's face looked like. Just eyes. Eyes that didn't blink. That night, he opened his recorder to replay the conversation. The file was corrupted, static, a low rhythmic sound beneath, like wet cloth slapping stone. He pressed stop. The sound continued. It was coming from the bowl. By morning, the bowl had stopped making noise. Or perhaps it hadn't. Perhaps Li Wei had simply stopped noticing. The sound had woven itself into the rhythm of the room, into the hush between footsteps, into the hum behind thoughts. He needed air. The lake was the only place that felt open, though it held no comfort. It was vast, circular, and unnaturally still. Not a single ripple, not a single reflection. Clouds passed above, but the water remained black and mirrorless, like a window looking into something it shouldn't. He walked along the edge, notebook in hand, recording impressions. No birds, no insects, no movement in the water, even when wind touches the surface. The lake didn't behave like a lake. It behaved like something pretending to be one. On the far side, half hidden by the mist, he noticed a small dock, old and rotting, just a few wooden planks held together by rusted nails. Beside it stood a weathered shrine, a squat stone structure covered in moss and prayer paper, its characters long washed away. Something about it pulled him in. As he approached, he saw offerings left behind, or what remained of them. Burned incense stubs, wilted lotus petals, and unmistakably another bowl. This one was shattered. Porcelain shards scattered like teeth around the shrine. Some still glistened, freshly wet. He crouched to examine them, and when he touched one, a sensation shot up his spine, not pain, but memory. A child crying, a door slamming, the sound of something boiling. He jerked his hand back, heart racing. The shard slipped from his fingers and fell into the lake with a faint plop. The sound echoed too long. He stared into the water where the shard had disappeared, then leaned closer. At first, he saw nothing, just black. But as his eyes adjusted, shapes began to emerge. Bowls, hundreds of them, sinking, floating, tilting at strange angles, some cracked, some intact, all slowly drifting just beneath the surface, as if waiting for something or someone. He stumbled back, breath caught in his throat. The surface rippled once, not from him, from beneath. A small circle, expanding outward, then another, like fingers gently brushing up against the underside. He turned to leave, but froze. At the edge of the dock stood the innkeeper. Her face was unreadable, hands folded in front of her, eyes not on him, but on the water. "You shouldn't be here," she said calmly. "Why are there bowls in the lake?" She didn't answer. "Are they offerings for the ones who—" "The lake remembers," she whispered, "even when we don't." "Remembers what?" "Everything." He waited, but she turned and walked away, her step soundless even on the gravel path. Li Wei stood alone, The fog pressed in tighter, as if trying to erase him from the scene. He looked back once more at the lake. The ripples were gone, and yet the feeling remained that something had looked up from the depths and recognized him. That night, he dreamed of bowls, not breaking, not moving, just watching. When Li Wei awoke, the wrapped bowl was no longer beside his bed. At first, he assumed he had moved it in his sleep, but when he searched the room, under the bed, behind the dresser, inside the armoire, it was gone. Only the square-shaped mark remained on the table, a faint ring of condensation where the porcelain once sat. He didn't mention it to the innkeeper. He wasn't sure why. Instead, he sat in the corner of the dining room, pretending to sip tea as she quietly prepared fish congee behind a bamboo screen. The room smelled of ginger and boiled bones. Through the open window, the village moved like a painting, still, faded, silent. Then a man entered, tall, wrinkled, thin as old rope. He wore an all-white tunic with threadbare cuffs and sandals with no soles. A bowl dangled from a red string in his hand, swaying as he walked. He did not look at Li Wei, just approached the counter and murmured something to the innkeeper in a dialect he didn't recognize. The innkeeper nodded and handed the man a tiny scrap of cloth, white. The man covered the bowl with it, tied a knot, and left. Li Wei stood. "Excuse me," he called after him. The man didn't stop, didn't turn. "Who is he?" Li asked the innkeeper. She stirred the pot without looking up. "He's preparing." "For what?" She met his eyes for the first time in days, and with the calm, practiced cadence of someone reciting an old verse, she said, "For the third day." "Which is when?" She turned away. "Tomorrow." Something sank in his stomach. Tomorrow. It had been 3 days since the Hungry Ghost Festival ended. He had marked the calendar in his journal, thought it was symbolic, a vague superstition wrapped in folk metaphor. But it was exact, a specific time, a real countdown. He felt the pressure of the missing bowl in his memory, as if the absence had weight. He stepped outside. The fog was thinner today, but colder. The air tasted of stone and old wood. He wandered back to the market square. A series of empty stalls clustered like teeth around a cracked fountain. No vendors, no buyers, only a faint trail of footprints in the dust, all pointing west, toward the woods, toward the lake. He followed. Halfway there, an old woman sat crouched on a low stool, weaving what looked like shrouds from white fabric. Her fingers worked fast, tying invisible knots, lips whispering soundlessly. Li Wei approached. "Ma'am?" She didn't stop weaving. "Do you know what happens tomorrow?" She stopped. Not gradually, not gently. Her hands froze in mid-motion, then slowly she looked up, eyes glazed but aware. "They eat what they gave," she said. "What does that mean?" "Those who offered their lives were promised a return. But they're dead." She shook her head. "Only memory dies. Spirit does not." Li Wei stared at the shroud. There was something written along the edge in red thread, stitched so faintly it was nearly invisible. It was a date. His birthday. He stepped back. "Where did you get this?" he asked, voice suddenly dry. She didn't answer, didn't look up again, only returned to her weaving as if the interruption had never happened. By the time he returned to the guest house, dusk had fallen, and the bowl was back on his nightstand, exactly where it had been before. Only this time, the cloth was missing, and inside the bowl, carved delicately into the porcelain, in neat calligraphy, was a name. His name. But he couldn't remember how to spell it.
The third day began in silence. Not the silence of sleep, nor the silence of peace, but the silence that feels watched. Li Wei woke before dawn, not by alarm nor instinct, but by something pressing against the walls of his sleep, like a memory trying to force its way in. The bowl was still on the table, still white, still his, but now the name inside was smudged, not scratched, not wiped, blurred, as if it no longer wanted to be read. He stood at the window. Outside, the world was pale and wet. The fog had thickened again, thicker than he had ever seen it, swallowing rooftops, fences, even the road itself. But within it, he saw motion. Shadows, slow, synchronized. A line of people, all dressed in white, all walking toward the lake. Each of them carried a bowl. All were covered. No one spoke. No one looked sideways. The procession moved like a single creature with 100 legs, gliding between trees, over stones, through the mist. Li Wei's breath caught. This was it. The thing they would not describe. The ritual they warned him not to see. The morning they told him to leave. And he was watching. He reached for his recorder, pressed record, slipped it into his coat. Then, against everything sensible, everything sane, he followed. The closer he drew to the procession, the more distorted the world became. Sound dropped out. No birds, no footsteps, not even his own breathing. The color faded from the trees, the grass, even the sky. Everything was washed in white and gray, like an old photo being erased as he looked at it. He crouched behind a cluster of bamboo and watched. The line reached the lake's edge. One by one, the villagers knelt. They faced the water, held out their bowls with both hands, and began to hum. Not music, not prayer, memory. Each tone sounded like grief, like fragments of thought given shape. And then they uncovered the bowls, together, slowly, like blooming white flowers on a still pond. Something in the lake responded. Ripples spread outward, not from where stones were dropped, but from beneath, as if something ancient and slow was waking. The villagers bowed lower. The humming deepened. Some wept, others trembled. Then Li Wei blinked, and the line was longer. At the end of it, 5 more people had appeared, all dressed in white, all carrying bowls, all with faces he didn't recognize, except one. A man with thick black glasses, a woman in denim jacket, a teenager with headphones hanging around his neck, tourists. He remembered seeing them on the bus days ago, before he arrived. They had smiled, laughed, asked for directions. Now, their faces were blank, their movements synchronized, and they walked with the same reverence as the villagers, as if they had always belonged here. The bowls in their hands were uncovered. Inside, each, a name. Their names?
or someone else's. Li Wei tried to focus, but the letters moved, slipping, rearranging, erasing. He blinked hard, heart racing, and then he realized he couldn't remember what his own name looked like, not how to spell it, not how to say it. Just a vague pressure in his skull, like a song he'd once known. He reached into his coat pocket. The recorder was missing. In its place, a bowl, covered in white cloth, still warm. He should have run. He should have turned back. But the moment the bowl appeared in his pocket, warm, wrapped, waiting, something shifted inside him. Not panic, not even fear, but an odd quiet, like the silence that follows surrender. The procession was still moving, slow and endless, circling the lake in single file. White garments whispered against the earth. Bowls were held with both hands, heads bowed low, steps measured as if choreographed by the dead. He stepped out from the trees, and no one noticed. No heads turned, no voices cried out. It was as if he had always been there. His feet found the rhythm without thinking. His hands gripped the bowl with muscle memory he didn't recall learning. Left step, right, pause. Left, right, pause. A whisper rose from the line, not speech, not chanting, a sound like breath moving through teeth. He turned his head slightly to glance at the person behind him, a woman, face pale, eyes blank, mouth moving silently. Then ahead, a man with long gray hair, twitching slightly with every step. No one looked at him. No one saw him. But they knew he was there. Something new. The lake was no longer a lake. It rippled now, not from wind, but from hunger. The bowls in their hands seemed to pulse, warm and cold in turns. And without understanding why, Li Wei felt something loosening, a memory. He tried to think of his mother's face, blank. His university, gone. The name of the professor who had sent him the original footnote, vanished. Panic surged, but his feet didn't stop. The procession moved on. And then, without command or signal, they all turned. One by one, like puppets on invisible strings, they shifted direction and began to walk into the water. The surface didn't splash. It opened, like breath. The first figure stepped in, ankle, then knee, then waist, and the lake swallowed without resistance. Their garments stayed dry. Their bowls remained steady. Then the next, and the next. Li Wei stood at the edge, heart pounding, unsure if he was awake or caught in someone else's dream. The man in front of him stepped forward. Water reached his chest. His mouth opened. A sound emerged, not a scream, but a moan filled with centuries of grief. Then he sank, vanished. Li Wei looked down at his bowl. The cloth had unraveled. Inside was no name, just a single character. Ugh. Hungry. A whisper curled around his ear, not from outside, but from the bowl itself. It didn't speak in words. It wanted. Memory. His memory. And he realized too late that watching the procession was never the danger. Becoming part of it was. The lake called again, and his foot moved forward. He did not remember stepping into the lake. He only remembered the cold, not on his skin, but in his thoughts. A slow, creeping numbness, like frost crawling across a window pane. And behind it, silence. Not the stillness of peace, the silence of something being erased. When Li Wei opened his eyes, he was lying on his bed at the guest house, dry, dressed. The bowl was on the nightstand beside him, wrapped again, untouched. And for a moment he thought it was just a dream. Until he opened his journal. Page after page had been scribbled in. Field notes, interview fragments, personal observations. But now, the ink was smudged. Entire sentences had vanished. Words blurred into one another. Names had been scratched out, or worse, rewritten in a hand that wasn't his. One note remained clear. Leave before the 3rd. Only now, 3rd had been overwritten. The word was darker than the rest, thick and wet. Underneath, barely visible, was what he had originally written. Leave before you're remembered. He blinked hard and flipped to the front page. Where his name should have been, there was only a water stain. No signature, no identity, just a blank space. Something was wrong with his memory. He tried to list 5 things about himself. Name, age, 20-something, university, mother's name, purpose of visit, folklore research, ghosts, ritual studies. The answers dangled in the air, half-formed, disintegrating before they reached his lips. He ran to the mirror. His face looked normal, mostly, but there was something wrong with his eyes, as if they were slightly farther apart than he remembered. Or maybe it was the mouth, or the shape of the jaw. No, it was the expression. The man in the mirror was trying too hard to look like him. His hands trembled. He reached for his phone to call someone, anyone, but the contacts list was empty. No names, just numbers with no labels. He called the first one. A woman answered. Hello? He swallowed. Do you know me? A pause. Then slowly. Who is this? I don't know. The line clicked. Silence. Then a voice, faint, whispering, familiar. You watched. The call dropped. He stared at the screen. The call log vanished, as if it had never happened. A knock echoed from the hallway. He turned. The door creaked open. The little girl with the red string stood in the hallway, eyes wide, string coiled in her palm like a noose. It's too late now. Too late for what? You gave them something, and they're still hungry. I don't remember giving exactly. She vanished around the corner. Li Wei sat down slowly on his bed. He looked at the bowl. The cloth was gone again, and inside, nothing. Just emptiness, which was worse than a name, because something had taken it and was waiting for more.
The mirror no longer recognized him. At first, it was subtle, a trick of light, perhaps. His reflection seemed slightly off, the arch of an eyebrow too high, a freckle missing, a scar he didn't remember appearing near his lip. But it got worse. That evening, he stared at the mirror for 20 full minutes and saw nothing. Not a blur, not a silhouette, just the room behind him, empty. When he blinked and leaned in again, a faint outline flickered into view, like fog on glass, a face trying to remember how to be his, and failing. He stumbled back, heart pounding, not from fear, not exactly, but from something deeper, grief, like mourning the loss of someone who hasn't died yet, himself,
He grabbed his notebook. Every page was now blank. He could swear it had been full. He had written so much: dates, symbols, quotes, sketches, warnings. Now, the ink was gone. The paper smelled faintly of lake water. He began tearing through his belongings. Passport, missing. Laptop, gone. Recorder, vanished. All he had left was the bowl. Still white, still wrapped, still watching. He opened the door and walked out into the night, barefoot, half-dressed. The village was asleep, or pretending. No lights in windows, no voices. Only fog, thick as cloth, curling round buildings and trees. The lake shimmered ahead, silver and silent, and near the shore, something stood. A figure, dressed in white, holding a bowl. Li Wei stepped closer, heart hammering. "Hello?" he called. The figure turned. It was his face, perfectly replicated, but the eyes were hollow, two empty bowls where his gaze should be. The mouth didn't move, but the voice arrived anyway, inside his head. "You gave them permission." "I didn't!" he shouted. "You watched, you followed, you stepped in line." "I didn't know what it meant." "It doesn't matter." The figure extended its bowl. Inside, black water shimmered. Floating at the surface, a fragment of photo. His childhood face, smiling, then dissolving. He screamed and woke up on the floor of the guest house, bowl clutched to his chest, shaking. The door was open. Footsteps echoed outside. When he crawled to the mirror again, he could see nothing. No fog, no outline, no face. Only the bowl behind him, perfectly still, reflecting where he should have been. The bowl would not leave his hands. He had tried. He had pried his fingers open, forced his palms apart, even attempted to throw it across the room. But the moment it left his grip, the world shifted, just slightly, like a breath held too long, and the bowl would be back, on the floor beside him, on the windowsill, in his lap, waiting, watching. By morning, he stopped fighting. The bowl had become part of him, an extension of thought, of identity, of surrender. He no longer remembered when he last slept, or ate, or said his own name aloud. What he did remember was the procession. Not the one he witnessed, a different one. Older, slower, grayer. Men with torn robes, women weeping soundlessly, children holding bowls too big for their hands. And at the center, not the lake, but a fire. A great roaring fire, fed with rice and branches and other things. He didn't want to remember what the other things were. He wandered outside. The village had changed, or maybe it had always been this way. The homes looked older, crooked, abandoned, paint peeling like dried skin. No one walked the streets anymore, but he could hear them, whispering behind walls, breathing beneath floorboards, stitching white cloth in endless loops. At the edge of the square, a new structure had appeared. A tall wooden post, a rope hung from the top, swaying despite the still air, and beneath it, a table, covered in bowls, dozens of them, wrapped, identical, each one marked with a character, not names, not dates, emotions,
shame, regret, hunger, guilt, silence. His own bowl began to hum softly. He opened the cloth. Inside, not a word, not a symbol, a reflection. His own face, but smiling, calm, accepting. And the moment he blinked, the face inside the bowl whispered, "You are ready now." The ground beneath him pulsed once, like something large had turned over in the soil. Then a figure approached, the innkeeper, dressed in white, barefoot, eyes glassy, hands outstretched. "Come," she said, "your place is waiting." "Place where?" he asked. "In the line." He shook his head. "I'm not from here." She tilted her head. "Then why do you carry the bowl?" He looked down. The cloth had vanished again. But now, instead of his reflection, there were memories, not his, flashing like film frames. A child's last breath, a mother's scream, a locked door, a famine, a vote, and the silence that followed it all. "I don't want this," he whispered. "But you already gave it," she said. "When?" She didn't answer. Instead, she placed her hand on his shoulder and turned him gently toward the lake. The fog had lifted. A long white line had formed again, waiting. A space open at the end, just wide enough for one more. The library didn't have walls. It lived beneath the guest house, a hidden cellar door discovered only when Li Wei dropped his pen and watched it roll toward a crooked floorboard that opened like a mouth. He wasn't surprised to find stairs beneath. Nothing surprised him anymore. Only silence did. The steps creaked like bones. The air was thick, wet with time. Cobwebs clung to his arms as he descended, each one whispering against his skin like threads from another life. The room was small, cold, lined with scrolls and red-threaded ledgers. The scent of mold, old incense, and dust woven with grief. He lit the single oil lamp in the corner. The flame flickered but did not fight. He found a book wrapped in silk. No title, just a stamped seal on the cover, a bowl with 3 drops above it. Blood, or memory, or both. He opened it. The pages whispered, and the truth unfolded. Hundreds of years ago, the village had been prosperous. Rice fields, trade routes, songs in the evening. Then the drought came. The lake dried first, then the wells, then the fields, and then the people. Starvation hollowed them, turned skin to paper, turned eyes to mirrors, turned love to math. How many could one feed? How many should be sacrificed so the rest could live? The answer was never spoken, but it was written in ledgers. The 3rd day. On the 3rd day of each moon cycle, 3 villagers were chosen. Not the old, not the weak. The strongest, the healthiest, the youngest. They were prepared. Bathed in white, bowls placed in their hands, names stitched into their garments. Then taken to the fire, but not burned, cooked, ritualized, consumed, not as cruelty, as covenant. And when the rains returned, the guilt remained. The village thrived again.
The bowls were buried in the lake. The names were erased. But the spirits returned, every year, demanding not flesh, but memory, because they had given themselves for survival, and now they fed on the only thing the living still had: identity, lineage, thought. The pages blurred in Li Wei's hands, not from age, from tears. His own. He didn't remember starting to cry, but his shoulders trembled, his vision blurred. He turned the final page. It was blank, except for one sentence, scrawled in fresh ink. He who records the debt must repay it. He dropped the book. Behind him, the cellar door creaked shut. From above, the sound of bowls clinking against wood, as if the ancestors were stirring.
He hadn't eaten in days, or maybe he had, but the hunger gnawed at him from somewhere deeper than the stomach, a kind of hollowness that didn't ask for food, only meaning. That night, the guest house was empty. The innkeeper was gone. The hallway lights were dim. A single bowl sat at the threshold of his room. Not his. It was smaller, cracked. Inside it, a photograph, water-stained, folded. He unfolded it. A family stood outside a house. A boy in the center held a kite. It was him, younger, smiling, whole. And he had no memory of the moment. None. The image meant nothing. Just shapes. Just strangers. A note was tucked behind the photo. One line, handwritten. They do not want food. They want proof they once existed. He dropped the bowl. It didn't break. He left the guest house and followed the soft hum in the air. The sound wasn't music, it was memory, carried in vibration. It led him to the temple near the lake, the one he hadn't seen before. Or had he? It didn't matter. The temple was open, no doors, no guardians. Inside, white-clothed villagers knelt in a perfect circle. In front of each, a bowl, covered. Lit incense cast long shadows across the floor, weaving and bending like old thoughts. In the center of the room was a basin of ink, dark and swirling. Every few seconds a villager would uncover their bowl, whisper into it, then dip it gently into the basin. The ink didn't coat the bowl, it vanished inside it, like memory drawn through bone. The whispering grew louder as he stepped closer. Not aloud, in his head. Tell us your first lie. Tell us your oldest sin. Tell us the name you buried. He clutched his ears, but it didn't help. They were inside him now. The villagers didn't look up, didn't speak to him. But one bowl in front of him was uncovered, empty, waiting. Li Wei staggered forward, breath shallow, body trembling. The hum became a low chant. Feed us, feed us, feed us. He leaned over the bowl. His reflection stared back, then shifted. A younger version of himself, crying, then older, screaming, then blank. A whisper in the air. Choose what to forget. He felt it then, the weight of everything he'd carried. Names, memories, guilt, love. The bowl pulsed. He opened his mouth, and something fell out. Not words, a sound. A memory. His first kiss. It slipped from his lips into the bowl like breath turned solid, and was gone. He gasped, tried to reach for it, but it was already sinking into the ink. Another whisper. You feed them every time you forget who you were. Another memory surfaced. His father's voice, his favorite book, his childhood bedroom, all lined up like lambs for slaughter. He backed away. The bowls around him turned to him, not physically, but in energy, like eyes rotating in sockets. The hum became hunger, the hunger became heat, and Li Wei ran.
He didn't remember running, only that the fog swallowed him differently this time, not like mist, but like fabric tightening around the throat. The temple disappeared behind him. The lake vanished to his left. The village turned inward, street by street, like a maze that rearranged itself with every panicked breath. But he didn't stop. He needed to find someone, anyone who remembered. Someone like him, someone who had watched and survived it. He stumbled past empty homes, past stalls covered in dust, past bowls left on windowsills like warnings. Then he saw it. A low wooden structure at the edge of the village. No signs, no candles, no footprints. But the door was slightly ajar, and something inside whispered, "Come see." Li Wei stepped in. The smell hit first. Mold, ink, earth, and beneath it, decay. Dozens of beds lined the room. No pillows, just thin mats and bowls at each corner. Figures sat on the beds, backs straight, hands folded, eyes open, but empty. Their mouths were stitched shut, not with thread, but with silence so thick it warped the air around them. Li Wei whispered, "Hello?" No one moved. He stepped closer. Their eyes didn't blink, didn't follow him, but they were awake. He could feel it. Souls trapped behind the eyes, screaming without sound. In the farthest bed, someone had carved a message into the wood using a fingernail. I saw it too. Beneath that, deeper, they let me live, but not leave. And beneath that, in broken gouges, memory is the cage, forgetting is release. Li Wei stepped back. The air felt heavier. His own name felt more distant than ever. He reached into his pocket. The bowl was there again, but this time, not white. It had turned gray, like it was feeding, like it was almost full. Behind him, a voice cracked through the silence. "Don't remember too much." He turned. An old man sat in the shadows, half covered by a blanket, bowl resting in his lap. His eyes were clear, tired but alive. "You were in the line," Li Wei said. The man nodded slowly. "Long ago." "You left?" "No." "Then why are you still here?" He touched his head. "I kept too much." "Memories?" "Names, faces, voices." "And what happened to you?" "They made me remember everything." Li Wei swallowed. "What happens if I remember who I was?" The man's voice dropped to a whisper. "Then you'll never be allowed to forget." "I don't understand." "You will." "When?" "When your bowl is full." Li Wei looked down. The surface of his bowl had begun to ripple, not with water, but with images. His life, flickering, rewinding, preparing for consumption. The man pointed toward the far end of the room. "There's one more place, a place where those who watch too long go to forget." "Where?" "The woods." "What's in the woods?" "Not what, but who." "Who?" "The ones who never came back to the line." Li Wei turned to leave. "If you go," the old man warned, "you'll have to choose, remember or disappear."
Outside, the fog parted just enough to reveal the path into the forest, and Li Wei followed it.
The trees closed in like ribs, tall, twisting, bark flaking like old paper. The fog was thinner here, but not clearer. It moved differently, not floating, breathing. Li Wei walked with his bowl tucked beneath his arm, feet crunching dried leaves that didn't smell like leaves at all. They smelled like pages, burned ones. The deeper he went, the colder it grew. Not on his skin, inside his mind, as if his thoughts were frosting over. And then he saw them. Figures, dozens, scattered through the forest like forgotten statues. Some sat cross-legged beneath trees. Some stood, motionless, hands raised as if they were trying to remember how to pray. Others knelt with faces to the soil, unmoving, unmoved. None of them spoke. None looked at him. But he could feel them, not watching, listening for the past. He stepped closer to one, a woman with matted hair and a tattered red ribbon around her neck. Her lips moved in a small, invisible pattern, a name, over and over, but not her own. "Who are you?" Li Wei asked softly. She didn't respond, but her eyes turned to meet his, empty, and yet full of everything she had tried not to forget. He turned to another, an old man rocking back and forth, clutching a photograph so worn it was nearly translucent, a child's face barely visible behind the creases. "Your son?" Li Wei asked. The man stopped rocking. A single tear rolled down his cheek, but he said nothing. Behind them, carved into the bark of a massive tree, was a message scratched in dozens of different hands. "We kept our names. We kept their names. And now we cannot leave." Li Wei's breath caught in his throat. He stepped back, heart pounding. These were not outcasts. They were refusers, people who chose to remember what was meant to be given, the unbroken, the unconsumed. But they had paid, not with death, with isolation, with silence, with eternity in fog, living in the margins of a ritual they could not escape and would not complete. His hand drifted to the bowl. It was hot now, not burning, pulsing, hungry. And then he heard a voice, familiar, soft, childlike. "You're not supposed to be here." He turned. The little girl, the one with the red string, standing at the edge of the clearing. "They don't like visitors," she said. "Who are they?" "The memoryless." "What do they want?" "Nothing," she said. "They gave everything, and now they're just waiting for someone to tell their stories." "Can I help them?" The girl looked up, eyes heavy with centuries. "No, but you can choose not to join them." "How?" "You already know." He looked down. The bowl was full, but not with memory, with choice. He could release what was left of himself, forget and join the line, or carry it all and end up like them. The girl whispered, "You have one more night." "Then what?" "Then the bowl chooses for you." She vanished into the fog, and Li Wei stood among the memoryless, wondering if he still had enough left inside him
to remember how to leave. The mirror was his last defense, not against spirits, against forgetting. He sat in front of it with a pen, a roll of tape, and what remained of his notebook, now mostly blank, but still his. "We do this now," he said aloud, voice dry, "before anything else is taken." He tore a strip of paper and wrote in bold, shaky strokes, "My name is Li Wei." He taped it to the mirror. "Next, I came here to study post-festival rituals. This village is not on any map. Today is the day after the third day. If the bowl speaks, do not listen." He placed another note on the mirror. "Do not follow the procession." It felt laughable now, because he already had. But he needed these words, needed something to pull himself back when the next unraveling came. He checked the bowl. It was on the floor, quietly steaming. Not with heat, with breath, like it was sighing in its sleep. He sat cross-legged and looked into the mirror. "What do you remember?" he whispered. His reflection stared back, tired, pale, older. Then, without blinking, it smiled. He did not. The reflection's lips curled upward, just slightly, an expression of sad familiarity, as if it had seen this moment before. He reached out, touched the glass. It was cold. The smile faded. He blinked, and for a split second, the mirror showed a room that wasn't his. A different window, a different bed. Then it snapped back. "No, no, no, I'm still here, I'm still—" The wording on the mirror had begun to smear. The ink dissolved. Letter by letter. "My name is Li Wei," became "My is—" then gone. He opened his notebook. The pages were blank again. His hands began to shake. He pulled out the small digital recorder from his bag, his final failsafe. "Entry number 1, he said, pressing record. "My name is Li Wei. I'm a researcher from—" He stopped. From silence. His voice trembled. "From the university? I studied at—" Nothing. A black wall where his alma mater should have been. "I came here because I found an old footnote about the third day ritual." He checked the recorder. The audio file was there. He played it back. Static. No voice. Just the faint sound of water dripping. Then something else. A whisper layered beneath the static. "You fed us." He dropped the recorder. The bowl on the floor began to rattle. Slowly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat. Li Wei stood, breathing hard. "I'm not done. You can't take what's not offered." But the room disagreed. The mirror showed a version of him now standing in the procession. White robes, bowl in hand, face blank. Behind the glass, his reflection opened its mouth and screamed without sound. Then smiled again. Li Wei backed away. The bowl had stopped rattling. The mirror was empty. No reflection. Only the words returning slowly across the glass, drawn in condensation. "You're almost ready." He packed what little he had left. A half-empty notebook. A recorder that no longer played his voice. A name he could barely say out loud. And the bowl. Always the bowl. He didn't want to take it. But when he left it on the nightstand and turned to zip his bag, it was already back in his hand.
waiting, warm, wanting. "I'm leaving," he said aloud. No one answered. The guest house was still. The village was quiet, too quiet, as if it knew, as if it had seen many others pack their things and whisper the same final lie. "I'm leaving." He stepped outside. The fog parted just enough for the road to appear, that narrow dirt path winding back toward the bus stop, the mountains, the world. He walked, past the fountain, past the bowl shop, past the crooked tree with red string hanging like veins. No one stopped him. No one followed. The village did not protest. That was the first warning. The silence was too willing. He reached the edge of the forest, the same path he'd walked 3 days ago or 3 weeks ago. He stepped into the trees. The bowl pulsed in his hand. "Don't look back," he told himself. Left foot, right foot, deeper into the woods. And then the road curved, just slightly. But when he rounded the bend, he was back, standing in front of the guest house, door still open, fog curling at his feet like smoke from a funeral pyre. He blinked. No! He turned and ran, this time deeper, past the trees, past the roots, past the forest's edge, or what should have been the edge. But no matter which way he turned, the road bent, the fog shifted, and the bowl in his hand grew heavier. He screamed, threw the bowl as far as he could. It disappeared into the mist, and the moment it left his hand, the world breathed in. Trees blurred, ground warped, sky folded inward, and when it exhaled, he was back again, standing in front of the guest house. The bowl was in his hand, still warm, still his. He dropped to his knees. "Why?" he whispered. From behind him, a voice answered, soft, familiar, the innkeeper. "You weren't trying to leave," she said. "Yes, I was." "No," she said gently. "You were hoping the village would pull you back." "That's not true." "Then why did you carry the bowl?" He had no answer. She stepped closer, placed her hand on his shoulder. "No one ever leaves after the 3rd day," she whispered. "Some think they do. They walk the path, they fight, but it always ends the same." "How?" he asked. "They walk in circles until the path becomes a line." "What line?" She smiled. "The one that leads to the lake?" Liwei looked down. His shoes were damp, muddy, and in the distance, through the shifting fog, the water waited, still, silent, reflecting nothing. When he woke, everything was white. The sheets, the walls, the light filtering through the fogged window, and his clothes, loose, cotton, not his, but they fit. He sat up slowly. His body was sore, not like injury, but like something had been drained. On the bedside table sat the bowl, still, covered, waiting, and next to it, folded neatly, was a piece of paper. "You look better this way." No signature, just handwriting too familiar to be anyone else's, his own. He stared into the mirror. The man looking back wore white, but the face was not entirely his anymore. Softer, paler, like it had been gently rewritten. Something subtle had changed in the spacing of the eyes, the curve of the jaw, like a mask carved from memory. He reached up to touch it, but paused.
Something inside him whispered, "Don't disturb the shape. It took so long to settle." He stood. The robe swayed around his ankles. The fabric was stitched with patterns he didn't recognize or couldn't anymore. On the back of his door, a string of white beads hung like a ceremonial necklace. He didn't remember putting them there, but when he reached for them, they felt familiar, like tradition, like debt. The bowl was warm again. He picked it up. The cloth shifted slightly in his hand, not from wind, from breath. It exhaled. He didn't flinch. That was the most terrifying part. He was no longer surprised. He left the room. The guest house was quiet, but this time he wasn't alone. Along the hallway, others stood in silence, men, women, even a few children, all dressed in white, all holding bowls. They didn't speak. They only bowed their heads slightly as he passed, as if he had finally joined them, as if they'd been waiting. Outside, the village was bathed in a pale, colorless light. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just the line, forming again. The procession, silent, moving toward the lake. And at the end of the line, a space, his space. He stepped into it. The moment he did, the person behind him stepped forward. The person in front shifted slightly. The rhythm resumed. Step, step, pause. The bowl pulsed in his hands, not as a burden, as a part of him, a tether, a purpose. And somewhere far behind the fog, a voice, his own, whispered, "This is who I was meant to be." But another voice, buried deeper, answered, "Or who you were made to become." Either way, he did not step out of the line. Not this time. The lake was waiting, still, quiet, endless. The line stretched toward it like a white thread pulling through mist. One slow, synchronized movement, like a ritual stitched into the land itself. Li Wei walked with them now, not beside, not behind, within. The bowl in his hands no longer felt foreign. It pulsed gently, not with hunger, but with memory. His memory. Not thoughts, but sensations. The warmth of his mother's hand, the ache of his first heartbreak, the smell of books in the university library, all drifting up like steam from the covered bowl. Each step forward felt lighter. Each pause more natural. The man in front of him had no hair, no shoes, no fear. The woman behind him hummed softly, tunelessly, a sound that once might have been a lullaby. They did not look at him, because they didn't need to. They had all walked this path before, and now so had he. As they neared the water's edge, the fog grew thinner. The lake revealed itself fully for the first time. It was not black. It was clear. Too clear. Beneath the surface, bowls floated like stars, some full, some cracked, some slowly turning as if stirred by a current that didn't exist. At the front of the line, the first villager stepped into the lake. No splash, no ripple. The water accepted them. One by one, they entered. Some vanished in 3 steps. Others walked until the lake swallowed their shoulders, their mouths, their eyes. The moment came. The person in front of Li Wei disappeared beneath the surface. It was his turn. He stepped forward. The water was cold, but not harsh. It clung to him like memory, familiar, sad. The first step sent a shiver through his spine. The second made his name flicker behind his eyes. The third made it vanish. He held the bowl close. It was glowing now, faintly, softly. A whisper rose in his ears, not sound, but understanding. This is not death. This is debt. This is the cost of being fed. His fingers loosened. The bowl floated gently from his hands. It drifted forward, turning once, then sank beneath the surface. He stood there, waist deep in the still water, waiting, not knowing what came next, not needing to, because he had joined the line, and the line never asked why. It only moved forward.
The bus came at dawn. No one waved it down. No one stood waiting. But it stopped anyway, and from it stepped a man in a brown jacket, backpack slung over one shoulder, notebook in hand. His name was Daniel Cheng, 31, cultural anthropologist, graduate of a university that didn't matter. He'd read something, somewhere, about a forgotten village near a lake in southern China, a footnote in an out-of-print journal. 3 lines. Festival of the Third Day. Memory-based ritual. Participation not recommended. Daniel smiled to himself as he stepped onto the path. That's exactly why I came. The trail was narrow, winding. Mist hung low, curling at his knees like cats. He walked with purpose, confident, curious, unaware. After an hour, the trees parted. The village appeared, quiet, modest. A few homes with wooden shutters, a crooked tree near the square, a stone fountain with no water. No welcome signs, no movement, just silence. Daniel made a quick note in his journal. Architecture consistent with 19th century southern provinces, no visible technology, preservation appears intentional. He walked further in. A child stood at the edge of a building, half hidden behind a door frame. A girl with 2 braids and a red string wound around her wrist. She stared at him, unblinking. "Hi there," he said. She didn't answer, just pressed a finger to her lips. Daniel smiled. "Okay then." He moved on. Behind him, the girl whispered, "Don't look on the 3rd day." But he didn't hear it. Not yet. He reached the guest house. A dim hallway, a single lantern. The innkeeper sat behind the counter, a woman in her 60s, hands folded, eyes hollow. "Do you have a room?" Daniel asked. She didn't reply, just slid a key across the counter. 2nd floor, last door. "Thanks, leave before the 3rd. Daniel blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Leave before the 3rd, she repeated, softer. He chuckled awkwardly. "You mean the 3rd day?" She didn't answer, just looked down. He took the key, climbed the stairs.
The room was small, simple, clean. On the bedside table sat a white porcelain bowl, wrapped in cloth, covered, waiting. Daniel frowned. I didn't ask for room service. He peeled the cloth back slightly. Inside, the bowl was empty, but faint, carved along the rim was a symbol he didn't recognize. He traced it with his thumb. It pulsed, just once, a flicker of heat, then stillness. He sat on the edge of the bed and wrote in his journal. Strange offering ritual. Will investigate. Locals appear passive but unsettled. Possible seasonal observance. He paused, then wrote one last line. I'll watch, just to see. Outside, the mist thickened, and somewhere near the lake, the procession began to form again. Dawn came without color. No golden light, no bird song, just pale mist pressing against the windows like breath from a sleeping mouth. Daniel woke to silence, not the kind that comforts, the kind that waits. He sat up in bed, notebook still open beside him, pen resting where it had fallen from his hand. The bowl was at the foot of the bed now, unwrapped. Inside it, a name. His. But the letters were beginning to blur. Strange, he muttered, voice thick. I didn't write that. He rose slowly, dressed, grabbed his notebook, and stepped out into the hallway. The guest house was empty, but not still. There was movement behind doors, breathing behind curtains, whispers pressed against the wood like wind with nowhere to go. He walked outside. The village was dressed in white. Everyone, old men, children, women with empty eyes. They stood in a line that curved toward the lake. Each one held a bowl. Each one wore silence like a second skin. Daniel's feet moved without instruction, toward them, into them. The space at the back of the line was waiting, and when he stepped into it, no one looked, because he was already part of it. The procession began. Step, step, pause. Mist kissed their feet. Fog hugged their robes, and before them, the lake waited. Daniel's breath shortened. I shouldn't be here, he whispered, but his mouth no longer formed words, just the echo of language. The bowl in his hands grew warm and heavy, like it held something more than air. A story, maybe, or a name he no longer remembered writing. Ahead, one by one, the villagers stepped into the lake. The water accepted them, embraced them, erased them. When it was his turn, he paused, for a heartbeat, for a thought. But no one stopped, and neither did he. The water was cold, then warm, then nothing at all. As he stepped deeper, his mind began to open, not like a flower, like a book. And the pages, his memories, peeled away. His mother's voice, the city he was born in, the reason he had come, all gone, floating down like ash into the bowl. Behind him, another figure stepped into the empty space he had left behind. A new face, a new visitor, holding a new bowl, covered in a new cloth, waiting. And the line moved on, as it always had, as it always would, because the third day was not for the living, it was for those we fed and who now feed on us.